The bond snapped into place at 11:04 on a Tuesday morning, in a conference room that smelled of cold coffee and someone else's ambition, and the first thing Ria Vasquez heard through it was, "She has the most inconvenient mouth I have ever seen in my professional life." Not spoken, not typed, just there in the new corridor between their nervous systems, as clear and involuntary as a heartbeat. Across the mahogany table, Sable Ashcroft, the Ironmark CEO, the woman the business press called the architect of necessary ruin, was reviewing the merger document her legal team had slid toward Ria 40 minutes ago. She had not looked up once. Her scent, black pine and cold iron, two notes Ria's designation could not stop cataloging, was entirely even. Her face was stone architecture, planes and purpose and nothing else. She was not thinking about Ria's mouth. Except she absolutely was. Ria pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her index finger hard enough to leave a crescent and told herself she had misheard. Except there was no mishearing the bond. She'd taken suppressants for 11 years, had her designation listed on her company file as undetermined by strategic choice, had attended every professional event of her adult life as a person rather than an omega, and the one morning she forgot. Because she'd been running on 4 hours of sleep and a stress response since the Callaway acquisition collapsed, the one morning her system slid past the pharmacological wall. This had happened. She'd bonded. Accidentally, in a business meeting. To the one alpha in the Northern Hemisphere with an actual documented kill count. Through the bond came a thought from across the table, in the tone of a woman updating a spreadsheet. The suppressant situation needs flagging. 7 days minimum before I can determine whether this is a full thread bond or a surface lock. Ria's pen moved. She initialed the section her attorney had flagged on page 31 of the agreement. She had been doing this, functioning, moving, breathing, for the last 47 minutes since the bond thread had opened without warning between them, and she intended to keep doing it until she was in a cab, and then in her apartment, and then possibly in a different country. Page 31 has an error. The voice came from across the table. Ria looked up for the first time since the bond snapped. Sable Ashcroft was looking at her. She had eyes the color of the sky above a storm, gray shading to violet at the inner iris, and she was looking at Ria with an expression of such perfect neutrality that it took Ria 3 full seconds to register that she was looking at Ria's hands. The amortization schedule compounds quarterly, but the performance clause uses an annual rate, Ria said. Sable was quiet. The thought arrived undecorated and immediate, she found it. Before UN. Before Callaway's whole team found it, in 40 minutes. Send a red line back by Friday, Sable said. Her eyes moved to the document. Ria looked at her pen. Neither of them acknowledged that anything had happened, because the alternative was impossible to hold in this room, at this table, under these fluorescent lights. In this particular version of their lives. The meeting ended at 11:47. Ria was in a cab by noon. She pressed her forehead against the cold window glass and listened to the city move past, and heard, faintly, already fading with distance, the echo of a thought that was not hers. Track the address. My name is Ria Vasquez. I'm 31 years old. I'm a forensic financial analyst with my own practice, 9 years of contract work for insurers and law firms, and 2 separate government agencies, a 1-bedroom apartment in the Mira district, and a precision suppressant protocol that has not failed me in over a decade until the exact worst possible moment. I have been an omega all my life, and a person first for most of it. And I was very, very good at that balance until Tuesday. The Callaway mess was the beginning. 2 weeks before the Ironmark meeting, I'd been contracted to audit the collapse of a mid-size infrastructure fund, the kind of job I'd built my practice on, clean and bounded, and technically intricate enough that I could stay inside the numbers for 3 weeks and not come up for air. Callaway's general counsel had specifically requested me because of the Hargrove case 2 years prior, where I'd located 4 years of layered misdirection in 11 days and reconstructed the actual capital flow using only publicly filed documents and a particular talent for noticing what should be there and isn't. That talent had a name in the profession. People called it negative space reading. My old mentor called it grieving for the missing. I called it the only useful thing my brain had ever done spontaneously. The Callaway audit ran 26 days, and I averaged 5 hours of sleep, and by the end I was taking my suppressants sometimes with coffee, and sometimes with nothing, and once, on day 22, not at all, because I was in a flow state with the document set, and I didn't surface until my alarm went off at 2 a.m, and by then the window was wrong, and I took them late and told myself it wouldn't matter. It mattered. I walked into the Ironmark conference room on Tuesday with my system running 7% below therapeutic threshold. I would not know this number until I had blood work done the following Thursday, and Sable Ashcroft walked in 3 minutes after me, and my body did what bodies do when an omega in suppression failure encounters an unpartnered alpha and something in the match probability. Calculus goes catastrophically right. The bond thread opened in a pain that was not pain exactly, a pressure behind my sternum, a sound like a filament being drawn taut, and then suddenly, the inside of my own head was not the only inside I had access to. I didn't tell her that day. I went home. I ran the numbers. I went back to my blood work and the timeline and the pharmacological data, and at the end of it, the conclusion was what it had been at the beginning. I had accidentally, through professional negligence and sleep deprivation, surface bonded with Sable Ashcroft, and the bond would calcify into a full thread within 30 to 60 days if it was not severed. And severance at this stage required both parties' documented consent and a medical protocol that took 96 hours and had a 30% complication rate in otherwise healthy omegas. I also kept hearing her thoughts. Not constantly. Not all of them. Only the ones that arrived with some force behind them, the ones her own system sent forward with something like urgency or amusement, or a quality I couldn't name yet. Distance degraded the signal significantly. Inside 20 meters it was clear. Past 50, it was static. Past 100, I heard nothing. I redlined page 31 of the merger document. I added 4 additional items that were wrong in different ways. 2 structural, 1 definitional, 1 that was technically not wrong, but would create ambiguity under Clause 8 if the deal ever went hostile. I sent it back Thursday afternoon with a cover note that was entirely professional and made no reference to any of the things I could hear inside my own head that did not belong to me. Friday morning, 8:43 a.m., her response arrived. It was 3 lines. The first accepted all 6 corrections. The second proposed a call Monday. The third said, I would like to discuss the Clause 8 flag in person. My office. Tuesday, 10 a.m. Ashcroft. Through whatever was left of the bond thread over that distance, I heard nothing. But I read the email 4 times, and then I sat in my desk chair and looked at the wall for a long moment. Because I knew what I was going to do, and I also knew it was not the sensible choice. I was going to go to the meeting. Ironmark's headquarters occupied the top 9 floors of a building in the finance quarter that had been designed to communicate permanence. The lobby floor was pale gray stone that had probably been quarried from somewhere with a name most people couldn't pronounce. The security desk ran on biometrics. 2 different people confirmed my identity before a third escorted me to the elevator and pressed the button for 43 and then stepped back out before the doors closed, which was either deference or the architecture of a predator's territory you enter alone. The 43rd floor smelled of cold iron and black pine. I'd anticipated that. What I hadn't anticipated was that it would hit me before the elevator opened, seeping through the doors as we rose, like an atmosphere, like weather. My body registered it in the way my body now registered everything related to Sable Ashcroft, which was immediately and without my permission. She's early. The thought arrived through the bond with the quality of mild surprise, and then I was stepping out of the elevator into an open floor of clean-lined desks and serious people, and at the far end, through glass walls, Sable Ashcroft was standing at a window with a phone to her ear and her back to the room, and even from here, through the glass, through 40 meters of corporate air, the thread between us was a live wire. Her assistant, Mara, mid-30s, beta, with the scent of strong tea and the expression of someone who had seen many things and filed them all appropriately, led me to a smaller conference room adjacent to the main office and said the CEO would be another 5 minutes. She was there in 2. The door opened without a knock. She sat across from me at a table designed for 4 and put a folder between us that I recognized as my own red line with her annotations in green ink, and she said, "Tell me how you found the Clause 8 issue." Backward reading the definitions section against the performance waterfall. The defined term for qualified revenue in Clause 8 diverges from its use in the waterfall by 11 words. Small divergence. In a hostile scenario, 11 words becomes a 9-figure ambiguity. She was quiet. Her hands were flat on the folder. She read the whole definition section, the bond delivered, with that quality I was beginning to identify as something adjacent to wonder, except held at arm's length from itself, the way someone keeps a door open just wide enough to feel the air without committing to the weather. How long have you been doing this work? 9 years. Where did you train? Holt and Mirren. 3 years. Then independent. Why independent? I work better without walls. I paused. Professionally speaking, the corner of her mouth moved. A fraction. A controlled fraction. Professionally speaking, the bond delivered, in a tone I could not categorize, and then something underneath it, "She's funnier than the file said." I looked at the folder. "I should tell you something." "Yes," she said, which was not the expected response. "You already know," I said. I detected it the morning of the meeting. Her voice was the same temperature it had been in every sentence she'd spoken to me, which was to say, room temperature. Not cold, not warm, the temperature of a controlled environment. I run a full panel monthly. By the Tuesday evening reading, I could confirm surface lock rather than proximity response. The thread is yours as well. I know. We have options. The standard severance protocol has a 96-hour timeline and requires mutual consent documentation. 30% complication rate in otherwise healthy omegas. I looked it up. The bond also calcifies into full thread without intervention between 30 and 60 days. After calcification, severance becomes significantly more medically complex. She was laying it out cleanly, and I respected that even as I was aware, through the bond, of what the clean layout was covering, not nothing. Something. A current below the surface of the controlled temperature that I did not have a name for yet. There's a third option, I said. Silence. I'm not recommending it. I'm naming it for completeness. She's naming it, came the thought from across the table, in a tone I could not decode. Because she's thorough. Because she reads the definitions section. The Ironmark Vasquez engagement is ongoing for the duration of the merger. That is a period of 4 to 7 months depending on regulatory review. A professional relationship of that duration creates a documented basis for continued proximity. It does. The bond, managed at a surface level and kept from calcifying, remains severable for approximately 90 days. Medical literature suggests it can be held at this stage with cooperative management. Also true. Which means we have time. I looked at her. She was looking at me with that same perfect neutrality, and below it, through the bond, a thought arrived that was quieter than the others and landed differently. Time to determine whether this is a mistake or the opposite. She didn't know I could hear that one. I'll finish the Callaway work this week. I can give Ironmark full attention starting the 23rd. Good. She stood. The meeting was over. She moved to the door and then stopped with her hand on the frame and didn't turn. Your suppressant protocol. Adjust it. If you're going to be on this floor, I need the signal managed. Because it's distracting? A pause. 1 second. 2, profoundly, said the bond, in a tone like someone admitting a structural flaw in load-bearing architecture. Because it's a professional consideration, she said aloud. Then she walked out. I sat in the conference room for a moment and looked at my hands and thought about managed surfaces and 90 days and the specific quality of a thought that someone transmits at low volume because they believe it won't be received. She didn't know I could hear everything. I hadn't decided yet what to do about that. The Ironmark offices had a particular rhythm that I was 3 days into when I found the second set of books. This is what forensic financial work looks like from the inside. You build a map of what should be there, and then you look for the places the map goes quiet. Missing documentation is louder than a confession in the language of financial architecture. The silence is specific. It has a shape. The Ironmark-Callaway merger had, inside its data room, a capital flow I'd flagged internally but hadn't surfaced yet, because I wanted to be certain. A subsidiary called Meram Holdings appeared in 3 separate disclosure attachments in ways that did not match each other. In the first attachment, it was a passive vehicle. In the second, it was an operating entity. In the third, its existence was implied by a tax treatment that would only make sense if it held active assets, and there was no third filing to confirm or deny. Meram Holdings was either a clerical inconsistency or someone's emergency exit. My job was to determine which. I was in the data room on the 41st floor at 7:14 in the evening, running the entity map for the 3rd time, when the door opened and Yuen Kassan walked in. Yuen was the CFO of Ironmark. He was 47, compact, with the scent of synthetic cedar and something bitter underneath that my designation read as low-frequency stress. He was also, per the org chart, the executive responsible for the Callaway data room. Miss Vasquez, he looked at the screens. Late to be working. The data doesn't care what time it is. He stepped closer than the table required, not threatening exactly. Calibrated, the merger timeline is quite sensitive. We wouldn't want preliminary findings going anywhere before the formal report. That's not how my firm operates, I said. Of course. He had a particular kind of smile, the kind that meant the words and the face had different authors. We just want to make sure the scope of your engagement is well understood. The CEO contracted for merger analysis, not historical entity review. He looked at the Meram Holdings node on my screen. Noted, I said. I didn't move the screen. He left. I sat in the empty room and looked at the node and thought about the particular sound of a warning dressed as a clarification. Then I thought about who in this building I could tell and how, and the answer was either nobody or one person, and that one person was complicated. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to the direct line I'd been given. Need 10 minutes. Not related to the Clause 8 flag. Related to something else. The response came in 4 minutes, my office. Now, it took me 6 minutes because I stopped in the hallway bathroom and ran cold water over my wrists and told myself to be precise and factual, and not to let the bond traffic affect my read of the situation. This was information that affected Sable's company and possibly Sable's legal exposure, and I owed her the information regardless of the complicated architecture of everything else. She was at her desk when I came in, which was different from the conference room. This was her territory entirely, and it smelled overwhelmingly of black pine and cold iron, and I stood 2 steps inside the door and delivered the Merrim Holdings situation in exactly the order I would deliver it to any client. Structure, inconsistency, hypothesis, evidence needed to close. She listened without moving. How confident are you? 80% that it's active and undisclosed, 60% that UN knows, 20% that the Callaway transaction itself was designed around it. What's the 20% scenario? The Callaway acquisition was a mechanism to legitimize Merrim's assets retroactively through the merged entity, which means Callaway wasn't a target, it was a tool. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the bond traffic quieted too, the way a city goes quiet before weather. Then I trusted that man for 6 years. I looked at my folder. I didn't say anything. She stood up from the desk and walked to the window, the one she'd been at when I arrived on Tuesday, with the phone and the back to the room, and stood there for a moment with the city below her. The light was going. The sky to the east was the color of old iron. I need the entity map by Thursday, not the merger analysis. The entity map. You'll have it Wednesday. Rhea. She hadn't used my first name before. The bond delivered something underneath it that arrived less like a thought and more like a physical change in air pressure, relief, and something harder and older under the relief, and the specific texture of a person who has been managing a fear for so long that being offered help is briefly indistinguishable from threat. "Thank you," she said. She was still facing the window. "It's what you contracted me for. It's more than that." I didn't answer. I left her with the city and the darkening sky and took the elevator back to 41 and sat down with the entity map and worked until midnight and through the bond faintly, with the distance between our floors softening the signal. I heard the thought she hadn't meant to send. I would like to give her something. I don't know what she needs yet. I'm going to learn. The Wednesday morning I delivered the Merrim entity map. A woman named Corinna Vale walked into Ironmark's public lobby and requested a meeting with the CEO's office. I didn't know this at the time. I was on 41 with 4 screens and a coffee that had gone cold, building the final layer of the map with the Callaway registration documents laid beside the Merrim disclosures. And I was 3 hours from completing the most technically satisfying piece of work I'd done in 2 years. And I was thinking about nothing except the negative space in the filing architecture. Then the bond delivered, Corinna. Not a thought. A name, the way someone says a name when a name is also an event. I put my pen down. I didn't know the name. I knew the quality of the transmission, sharp, and underneath it, something that had been behind glass for a long time, suddenly being in the same room as the glass. I looked at the maps in front of me, and I did the thing I should not have done, which is to say I sat with the bond, and I listened. Not clearly. Distance was 60 feet of concrete and steel, and I had what amounted to signal fragments, but the fragments included, thought she was in Lisbon. UN, he called her. And then, quieter, she still smells the same. And then something that was not a thought so much as a closing, the way a face goes neutral to cover the response the face would otherwise give. I finished the entity map by 2. I sent it up at 2:15. At 2:47, Mara appeared in the doorway of 41 and said, "Miss Vasquez, The CEO would like you to join her at 3. The office had 3 people in it when I arrived. Sable at her desk, a man I didn't know standing near the bookcase with the posture of someone who has taken many bullets on behalf of other people, and Corinna Vale. Corinna Vale was the most immediately obvious alpha I had encountered in my professional life outside of Sable herself. She had the particular scent of amber and hot glass, warm notes that my designation cataloged in the way it cataloged everything around me now, which was carefully and with a note of threat. And she was dressed with a precision that communicated money spent to look like indifference. She was watching me with the expression of someone adding me to a map. Miss Vasquez, this is Corinna Vale. She holds a consulting agreement with Ironmark's predecessor entity that carries forward under the merger terms. She's raised a concern about the scope of your audit. I'm sure she has, I said. Corinna's attention moved from me to Sable in a way that contained history I wasn't owed access to. The predecessor agreement was sealed, Sable. A full forensic audit risks exposing elements of the restructuring that were legally protected under the seal. The seal applies to the predecessor entity. Once the Callaway acquisition closes, the merged entity's obligations are governed by the merger terms, which include standard disclosure requirements to the Aquaries regulatory bodies. Any predecessor agreement that touches Meram Holdings is eligible for review. Silence. You've briefed her on Meram, Corinna said to Sable. Not a question. Miss Vasquez discovered the Meram entity independently. A look passed between them that the bond translated as, she told you before she told me. And underneath it from Sable, quieter, yes, because I trust her. Notice that. I'd like to speak with you privately. You can say whatever you need to in front of my analyst. She had called me her analyst. I had been her contracted auditor for 11 days. Through the bond, I heard the thought she sent with it, addressed only to herself. She is also the only person in this building whose judgment I currently trust. And I am not explaining that to Corinna. Corinna looked at me for a long moment with the expression of someone recalibrating. Then she said, the restructuring that created Meram was done to protect a specific set of assets from a legacy claim. The claim was fraudulent. The protection was legal. The optics are complicated. What kind of legacy claim? A wrongful termination suit filed by a former officer who was terminated for cause and attempted to use litigation to extract a settlement. Was it settled? It was dismissed. A pause. After the assets were repositioned. I looked at the entity map. The repositioning happened 18 months before the Callaway approach. Yes, which means Meram was created specifically to move those assets. Yes, and UN Kassan oversaw the repositioning. Corinna looked at Sable. Something moved across her face that was not quite guilt and not quite warning. The expression of someone who has been holding a door open for a long time and has not decided which side of it they're on. UN contacted me 2 days ago. He wanted to know whether the legacy claim documentation still existed in discoverable form. The room went quiet in a different way. Through the bond, she's telling me because she's choosing. After all of it, she's choosing this side. And underneath it, unguarded, I don't know what that costs her. I'd like that contact documented. In writing, dated, to your attorney, today, Corinna looked at me directly for the first time. You're not what I expected. Nobody ever is. The documentation still needs to happen today. She left. The man near the bookcase, I would learn later he was Sable's head of security, a beta named Torres with 17 years in her service and the precise posture of someone who has decided where his loyalties live and will not be renegotiating, followed her out and closed the door. Sable and I were alone in the office. She was standing at the desk, and I was 3 meters away, and the bond between us was the loudest it had ever been, which is to say it was not loud in the way of noise, but in the way of pressure, the way a room becomes loud when it is very full of something unsaid. Corinna and I were together. 3 years. It ended badly. She left for Lisbon. I learned some things afterward that I didn't have access to while we were together. You don't have to tell me that. I know. I'm telling you because you're going to find it in the entity map anyway, and I'd rather you hear it from me. What will I find? That the wrongful termination suit was filed by a man Corinna helped position into the company, whom I fired for documented cause. And that Merrim's creation was not entirely a defensive move, it was also a protective one. For Corinna, because at the time I still believed she hadn't known. Did she? A pause. Long enough to count. Yes, she knew. I looked at the entity map. The documentation for Thursday's report gets complicated. Yes, I'll need 2 more days. You have them. Sable, her first name. I hadn't used it before. The bond registered it. I felt my own use of her name arrive through the bond from her end, which was a strange experience, the doubling of a single word. I'm going to find everything in this map. Whatever it shows, I'm going to be accurate. I know. That's why I need you to find it. She paused. That's why I need you. She said the last 3 words with the specific care of someone who is aware they are saying more than one thing and has decided to say it anyway and will not be explaining which layer they meant. I stood there with my folder, and I did not say anything for a moment, because the bond was full of something that wasn't a thought, just the feeling of 2 people in a room that has gotten smaller without either of them moving. I'll have the full map by Friday. Thank you. I left. In the elevator, I pressed my back against the wall and looked at the ceiling and heard, very faintly through 40 feet of building, she said my name like it was hers to use. And then, almost too quiet to catch, it is. The attack happened on a Thursday. I was leaving the building at 9:43 in the evening. I knew the time, because I checked it when the elevator opened and I registered 2 things simultaneously. The lobby was emptier than it should have been, and the scent of synthetic cedar and bitterness was behind me before the door finished closing. Yuen Kassan was not alone. There were 2 other people with him, both alphas, both with the posture of hired management, and they were between me and the street, and the security desk was empty in a way that did not happen accidentally. Miss Vasquez, he had the voice of someone who had made a calculation. The entity map. Sent to the client at 6 and filed with the regulatory body at 6:03, which was the contracted procedure. He went still. The original and 2 copies. Anything that happens to me in the next 30 seconds becomes extremely interesting to 3 separate legal teams. I had not sent the map at 6. I had sent it at 6, and I had also sent a separate package at 5:59 to an attorney friend with instructions to file it with the regulatory body if I didn't check in by 10. I had done this because the lobby had felt wrong when I entered it at 8, and I had learned, 9 years of forensic work, to trust the feeling of a map that isn't adding up. Yuen made a decision. The decision was visible on his face in the same way that a structural flaw is visible in load-bearing architecture, if you know what to look for. A small deviation from the expected line, and then the weight lands wrong. He moved anyway. The first grab was at my bag. I let the bag go and stepped backward into the desk, and I was running the geometry of the lobby, exits, sight lines, delay options, when the front door opened and Torres walked in with 2 security staff, who were not the ones who usually staffed the evening desk, and behind Torres. moving with the purposeful economy of someone who has stopped waiting for information and acted on what she has, was Sable Ashcroft. She had come from somewhere in a hurry. Her coat was in her hand rather than on her back. She took in the lobby in 1 second, and her eyes found me in the next, and I heard, through the bond, not a thought, but something below thought. A release of pressure that was the sound of a fear being over. Torres was already handling the geometry. Sable walked across the lobby floor to me and stopped close enough that her scent was immediate and grounding, and she looked at my face with the expression of someone conducting an inventory. "Are you hurt?" "No, your wrist." I looked at my wrist. There was a red mark where the bag strap had pulled. "Cosmetic." She looked at it for another moment. Then she turned to where Torres had Yuen and the 2 hired men in hand against the far wall, and she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds, and I felt through the bond the shift between the version of her that had run across a lobby and the version that was the architect of necessary ruin. And when she spoke, her voice had the temperature of the 43rd floor at its most controlled. "Call Petra, full filing package, all 3 jurisdictions, and get the building's evening security logs from 6 p.m. Forward, whoever vacated that desk tonight is going to find the next years of their professional life very small." She turned back to me. "You filed it already, not a question." 5:59. Something moved across her face that I had not seen on her face before. It was not relief. Relief had already happened, in the lobby, before she reached me. This was something else. The specific expression of someone who had expected to need to rescue something and arrived to find it already safe because the person they'd come for had anticipated the need and acted without being told. She protected herself, the bond delivered, and the layer underneath it was a warmth I had no mapped word for, and she did it alone. She didn't wait. "Come upstairs. I'm fine. I should go home and, Rhea," her hand closed around mine. Not the injured wrist, the other hand, just the closing of fingers and the warmth of her palm and the scent of black pine going from the temperature of a controlled environment to something else entirely, warmer, and underneath the warmth a kind of roughness, like pine in actual weather rather than in a room. "Come upstairs." I went upstairs. The 43rd floor at 10:15 in the evening was empty except for the 2 of us. Sable led me to a room off the main office I hadn't been in, smaller, furnished with a couch and a table with actual food on it, which was not what I expected. She had, at some point in the last 3 hours, had someone bring dinner, 2 portions of something warm, a pot of tea, a plate of the particular pastries I had mentioned once in passing on day 2, when Mara had asked about dietary restrictions, and I'd said no restrictions, except that I was indifferent to sweet things, except for the almond ones from the bakery on Strand. The almond ones from the bakery on Strand were on the plate. I looked at them. I looked at her. She was setting her coat down on the back of a chair with her back to me, and I heard through the bond the thought she was not guarding, because she didn't know she needed to, too obvious. "She's going to know I asked specifically." "You remembered," I said. She turned. Her face was doing the controlled thing. Her scent was doing the other thing, the warm, rough pine, the tell she couldn't manage with the same precision as her expression. "Mara keeps notes on client preferences." "Mara keeps notes on a lot of things," I agreed. She sat across from me, and we ate, which was extraordinary in its ordinariness. 2 women at 10 in the evening, with food between them and a legal situation unfolding on the floors below, and a bond humming at a frequency that felt less like interference now and more like a new kind of quiet. She asked about the entity map with the specificity of someone who had read it carefully. I explained 3 sections in more detail than the written summary allowed. We talked about Callaway and Merrim and the predecessor entity, and the shape of what Ewan had built and why. And then we talked about something else for a while. She asked how I'd gotten into forensic work, and I told her about Holt and Mirren, and the Hargrove case, and the mentor who'd named the negative space reading, and she listened with the particular quality of listening that means someone is building a map of you from what you say. I had the thought that she was doing what she did with documents, looking for what should be there and noticing the places the map went quiet. What aren't you telling me? I looked at my tea. I can hear you. The room was quiet. Through the bond. Not everything. Thoughts that arrive with some force behind them. At close range. I looked at her. I have been able to hear you since the first meeting. Sable was still. She had a way of going still that was different from other people's stillness. Most people go still by stopping motion. She went still by consolidating. The way a building settles into its foundation. How much? Enough to know that you think my mouth is inconvenient. Professionally speaking. A silence that lasted 3 seconds. She heard that one, came the thought, and under it, fully unguarded for the first time, of course she did. Of course. She reads the definitions section backward. She files the map before the threat arrives. She hears what isn't supposed to be audible. And then, very quietly, like a door opening onto weather, good. Good? She looked at me across the table, and the controlled temperature of her expression had shifted in a way I was learning to read. Not absent, but translucent. The control still there, but the thing beneath it visible through it. The way a light source is visible through paper. I've been, not careful, about what I think near you. Because I didn't know you could hear it. I know. And you didn't tell me. No, why? I thought about this. I thought about the entity map and the negative space and the lobby and the almond pastries, and I said, because the thoughts you weren't guarding were the most accurate information I had access to. About what this is. And what is it? The bond between us was very present in that moment. Not intrusive, not loud, but present the way a heartbeat is present. Consistent and particular and impossible to imagine the absence of. I don't know yet. But I'd like to find out. She looked at me for a long time. Outside the windows, the city was lit in segments, financial district and residential, and the long dark band of the river to the east, and her scent was entirely warm now. Black pine in rain, cold iron gone to something that was almost the same note played in a different key. And I was aware of the table between us, and how much of the room we were each occupying, and how the distance between those. 2 territories had been getting smaller by increments for 23 days. The bond. If we continue, if we choose to continue, it calcifies. Severance after calcification is medically significant. I read the literature. Rhea. Sable. I told my board this was a business arrangement, the analyst and the CEO. Clean lines. I know, I heard you tell them. Another silence. And through the bond, fully audible, entirely unguarded, I lied to them. I don't make a habit of that. I've been lying to them since day 3. Since day 3? The corner of her mouth moved, and this time it was not a fraction, it was the whole thing. A rare full architecture, the expression of someone whose face has decided to stop lying independent of the rest of them. You found 4 things wrong with the merger document. My entire legal team found 1. The suppressant situation. You told me to manage it for professional reasons. I told you that, yes. Was it true? She looked at me. She reached across the table, slowly enough that I could have moved, and her hand covered mine on the table, warm and deliberate and smelling of black pine and rain. And I felt through the bond. Not a thought, not words at all, just the sensation of something very tightly held, finally being permitted to rest. No, the rest of the evening I am keeping, which is to say, I am not narrating it in the way I would narrate an entity map or a filing procedure. I will say that the table was not between us when it mattered. I will say that black pine in rain smells entirely different from black pine in a controlled environment. I will say that she did not ask with words until I answered with words, and the asking and the answering were both careful, and neither of them were cold, and there was a window with the city below it, and the moment was exactly what it was, which was the first genuinely honest thing that had happened to me in a long time. The bond, that night, went from a thread to something wider. We both knew what that meant. We both chose it anyway. The morning after the lobby incident, I came to the office to find my workstation on 41 gone. I found it on 43. Mara showed me without comment to a space adjacent to the main office, a room with actual natural light, connected to Sable's by a door that currently stood open, with my screens migrated and my entity map files transferred, and a fresh pot of coffee that was correctly the temperature and strength I preferred, because Mara kept notes on client preferences and had apparently updated the category. Yuen Kassan had been escorted out of the building at midnight. 2 of the 3 parties he'd hired were in police custody. The third had provided a recorded statement to Petra Lynn, Ironmark's senior outside counsel, that covered the lobby incident, the attempt to suppress the Meram documentation, and a chain of communication that went back 11 months to a decision Yuen had made alone and had been managing alone since. Corinna Vale's documented account of the contact he'd made to her arrived at Petra's office at 8 in the morning and was, per Petra, exactly what was needed. Torres told me this in the hallway on my way to the new workspace, in the terse, abbreviated way Torres communicated most things. Facts in order, no decoration. He had been with Sable for 17 years. He had, he said, never once seen her move across a lobby the way she'd moved across the lobby last night. She runs? She walked fast. For her, that's running. He looked at me with the expression of someone who has added information to a file and found the file now complete. She doesn't walk fast for acquisitions, or for legal problems, or for a board crisis, and we've had several. He paused. Just thought you should know. Thank you, Torres, ma'am, he said, and walked away. The next 6 weeks had a shape I couldn't have predicted from inside them. They were the shape of 2 people in close daily proximity choosing, incrementally and with full awareness of the consequences, to close all available distance. She gave me access to the full Ironmark file structure, not the merger documents alone, but the company architecture, going back to its founding, which was a level of access I had not been contracted for, and which I did not question, because questioning it would have required pretending I didn't know the reason. She started appearing in the workspace with food at approximately 1 in the afternoon on the days I forgot to eat, which was more days than I would admit to anyone. She asked questions about my work with the focused attention of someone who wants to understand a thing rather than use it, which was not the relationship I had with most clients. I started running in the morning past the park near Ironmark's building, which happened to be the same park she ran through at 6:40 a.m., which I knew because I had heard through the bond the thought she had every morning at 6:25 while looking at her running shoes. This was either surveillance or courtship, possibly both. The first morning I appeared at the park entrance, she was already there, and she looked at me with the expression that was becoming familiar, the controlled one, with the weather visible through it, and said nothing for a moment. Then, there's a better route if you go left at the iron gate. Show me, I said. We ran 5 miles in the early morning dark, and neither of us said anything for most of it, and it was one of the better silences I had been part of. The Meram disclosure broke publicly on a Tuesday. Petra had managed the sequence carefully, regulatory first, press second, board simultaneous, and by mid-morning the financial news had the headline, and by afternoon Ironmark's share price had corrected 17%, which Sable had anticipated and had structured a buyback to manage, and by 5 o'clock the CFO's arrest was confirmed, and the initial scope of what he'd built was on 3 major outlets. I watched it from the 43rd floor. Sable was in a board call. Through the bond, I felt the shape of the call without the content, controlled and dense, the emotional weather of a room where people are frightened and need to be reminded that someone is managing the structure. The call ended at 6. She came out of the conference room and saw me at the window and crossed the floor to stand beside me, and we looked at the city together, and her scent settled from the stress-compressed version into the warm rain and pine version, and I was aware of her shoulder an inch from mine, and the bond going easy and wide between us. The board wants a statement tomorrow. What are you going to say? That the audit process discovered and surfaced the issue. That the analyst contracted to conduct the review acted with complete professional integrity under significant personal risk. She paused. That the company owes her a public acknowledgement. That's going to raise questions. Yes, about what I am to the company. Yes, and what are you going to say about that? She turned. We were close enough that her scent was the entire available atmosphere, and the bond between us was the full thread now, calcified and permanent, and neither of us had said a word about that directly since the night it happened, because some things are too present to discuss from inside them. I haven't decided the exact wording. I know what it is. I'm still drafting the statement. You don't draft slowly. I've watched you draft. You're fast. I'm careful with things that matter. The drafts I'm careful with take longer. The bond delivered the full text of what she was not yet saying, which I could hear entirely, and which I will not transcribe here because some things are not mine to reveal before she's ready to say them. I will say that they were not ambiguous. I will say that they were not business arrangements. Take the time you need. Rhea. She reached up and tucked one strand of my hair behind my ear, a small gesture, specific and deliberate, with the quality of her other deliberate gestures, chosen, not impulsive. I've been known, in my career, to move quickly when I'm certain. I know. I've read your acquisition history. This is different from acquisitions. Very different, I agreed. I'm certain. I looked at her. Black pine in rain, cold iron gone warm. The particular expression of a woman who has decided that control mistaken for strength is the real weakness, and has decided this recently enough that the decision is still visible in her face. I can hear you, you know. I can hear what you're certain about. I know. I'm not saying it for the first time. I'm saying it where you can hear both versions at once. I took her face in my hands, which was also a first. She had touched me more than I'd touched her. The careful asymmetry of someone managing how much they take before they've been invited to take it. And I brought her forehead down to mine, and we stood there with the city below us and the bond between us like a cord pulled taut, and still, and I said, "Ask me." With my words? With your words? She asked. I answered, and then the distance that had been closing by increments for 6 weeks closed entirely, and the bond responded to it the way bonds respond to what they've been waiting for, with the interior equivalent of a room finally lit from the inside. The press conference was the next morning at 9. I was not at the podium. I was in the second row of the assembled room with Torres to my left and Mara to my right, and Corinna Vale, unexpectedly, at the end of the row, who had come back from Lisbon not for the press conference, but, she told me quietly before it began, because she wanted to see how it ended. Sable at a podium was Sable at maximum clarity, economical, exact, the voice of the building's highest floor. She gave the statement she'd drafted, which covered the timeline of the Meram discovery, UN Kassan's 11 months of concealment, and the decision to surface rather than manage the situation. She credited the audit process. She credited the analyst. She used my name twice and my professional title once, and neither usage was the one the room was listening for. The room was listening for the question a journalist in the third row asked, because journalists in the third row are paid to ask the question the room is listening for. There have been reports of a bond between you and your lead analyst. Can you address that? Sable was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Yes, is it accurate? It is. She looked at the room with the expression of someone who has done the math on all available positions and selected the accurate one. Ms. Vasquez and I are bonded. This was disclosed to the relevant parties according to the applicable professional guidelines. The bond did not affect the conduct of the audit. If anything, it ensured a higher standard of communication between the CEO and the auditor than the structure would otherwise permit. I am confident in the integrity of the findings. She paused. I am also confident in the bond. The room had a particular quality of silence after that, not hostile, not comfortable. The silence of people recalibrating. Corinna Vale, at the end of my row, said quietly, "She's never done that before." Done what? Said something true about herself in a room with cameras. In 3 years, she never once. She paused. She's different with you. I can hear her. It's hard to be different when the other person can hear you. Corinna made a small sound that was almost a laugh. No, it's not the hearing. I could always tell what she was thinking, more or less. It's that she's decided you're allowed to know. I looked at Sable at the podium, answering the follow-up questions with the same economy and precision, and I thought about the bond and the entity map and the almond pastries and the park at 6:40 in the morning, and I thought about the difference between being known and being seen, which had always seemed like the same thing to me until recently. Sable had known many people. She'd kept ledgers on all of them. What she had done, was doing, was different. She was reading the definitions section backward. She was looking for what should be there and noticing the places my map went quiet, and she was not cataloging the silence. She was sitting with it. That is what it feels like to be seen. Not assessed. Sat with. The legal proceedings against UN Kassan moved through the system with the pace of legal proceedings, which is to say slowly and thoroughly and with an outcome that was never particularly in doubt once the documentation existed. Petrolin was formidable in correspondence and more formidable in person. The regulatory filing created a parallel track that ran alongside the criminal matter, and by the time spring arrived, both tracks had resolved in the expected direction. UN entered a plea on a Tuesday. The 2 hired men from the lobby took arrangements that required their cooperation. The third, who had provided the initial statement, received consideration for that cooperation and relocated to another city in another industry with a file that would follow him without advertising itself. The Ironmark board approved the merger under the revised terms Sable had negotiated after the Meram disclosure, Callaway's assets without Meram's liability, which was actually a cleaner structure than the original deal, and which 3 members of the board acknowledged privately was a better outcome than what they'd been heading toward. One of them said this to Sable in a hallway in front of Torres and me, adding that the audit process had saved the company from a structural problem they hadn't seen coming. My analyst saved the company, Sable said pleasantly. The board member looked at me. Remarkable work. Thank you. I read the definition section. Sable's expression, beside me, was fully visible to me at this point, I had learned to read the full architecture of it, the translucent and the opaque, and the weather underneath. What it said, in that moment, was, "She is never going to stop being exactly like this, and I would not change one word of it." There are things I should tell you about Sable Ashcroft that the press coverage does not cover, because the press coverage has the same relationship to her that a document's executive summary has to the full filing. It catches the shape, but not the texture. She does not sleep well. She has not slept well since the death of her mother 11 years ago, which is also when she became the architect of necessary ruin, because the company her mother built needed someone to be hard, and she decided that someone would be her, and she was very good at it, and it cost her something she had not fully named until recently. She runs in the morning, because the morning is the only time the city is quiet enough to think in. She makes decisions quickly, and then holds them with the patience of someone who has learned that decisions and outcomes are different timelines, and the space between them is where you live. She learned to hold things at arm's length because the things she lost completely. Her mother, Corinna, in the aftermath of what Corinna had known and not told her. The version of herself that could afford to want things openly. She has been unlearning that. The unlearning does not look like warmth exactly. From the outside, it looks like a woman who moves fast across a lobby. It looks like almond pastries from the bakery on Strand, ordered specifically and described as standard client protocol. It looks like a park route offered without explanation at 6:40 in the morning. It looks like using my name in a board statement and calling it a professional decision. From the inside, which I have access to, through the bond, and which I have been given permission to have access to, it feels like a door that has been closed for a long time, standing open. Her mother was named Vera. She built the company from nothing in 11 years. She believed, Sable told me once, at the end of an evening that had started as a debrief on the regulatory timeline and become something else by the time the city had gone fully dark, that the way to prevent grief was to be the one who left first. I inherited the doctrine. I spent 15 years building the corollary. If you don't let anyone in, you don't have to leave. How's that working? I'm telling you my dead mother's philosophy. Badly, apparently, I looked at her in the particular light of the 43rd floor at late evening. She wasn't wrong that grief is the cost of love. She was wrong about the math. The alternative isn't no grief. It's no love, and also you're still alone when the grief comes anyway. Sable was quiet. My father died when I was 9. We had 9 years. My mother said she'd make the same choice 100 times. 9 years. 9 years is not nothing, I said. She looked at her hands, and then at me, and the bond between us carried something that was below thought again. Not words, just the texture of a decision settling into the place decisions settle when they're done being made. I'm not good at this. You're learning. Faster than you think. How do you know? I can hear you. You've been practicing the words for 3 days. She stared at me. Ria, I love you has been in your head since last Tuesday. The syntax has changed a few times. You went through a period where it was I believe I love you, and another where it was I think I may, and then Wednesday morning in the park you landed on the direct version, and you've been holding it. That is a significant invasion of privacy. Yes, I know. I'm sorry. I paused. I'm not sorry, I know. She looked at me with the fully visible expression, no controlled opacity, no translucency, just the thing itself, which was the face of someone who has decided to be seen. Ria, I love you. I love you. I have been loving you since about day 4, and the almond pastries confirmed it. She put her face in her hands. The pastries. They're from Strand. You sent someone to Strand. That's 37 minutes from here. I have a driver. You sent your driver to Strand at 1 in the afternoon because I mentioned once that I liked them. She took her hands away from her face. She was looking at me with the expression I had learned to identify as the one she only gave me, the fully unguarded one, the warm, rough pine in actual weather, the door all the way open. Tell me to stop. Don't stop. The bond registered what came next as the full thread equivalent of a room going from ambient to lit. Not louder, not brighter, just more itself, more clearly and continuously, the thing it had been becoming since an elevator and a conference room, and a document with 6 errors and a woman who read backward, looking for what should be there. The claiming mark is on the inside of my wrist. Hers is where the neck meets the shoulder, which I chose because I wanted it somewhere she could feel, but not necessarily see, which she said was forensic even in personal matters, which is accurate. She wore a high collar for 3 days afterward, and I did not comment on this. Torres commented on it. He said, "She's walking differently." He said this to me in the hall. He added, "In 20 years, she has never once walked like a person who slept." He paused. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. That's a very personal observation." "Yes," he said. He walked away. I would like to tell you what came next in exact order, because I am a person who likes order and precision, but some of what came next was not linear. It was the shape of a life reconfiguring around a new center of gravity, which is not a linear process. What I can tell you in order, Sable's board made a statement 3 months after the UN proceedings closed, confirming that the CEO and the lead analyst of the Ironmark Callaway audit were bonded partners, and that the relevant disclosures had been made, and that the board had full confidence in both the conduct of the audit and the ongoing governance of the company. This statement was 143 words. Sable had written it in 11 minutes. I closed my independent practice and established a new entity, Vasquez Ashcroft Financial Review, which operates with a staff of 6 and a client list that I curate carefully, and which does not include Ironmark directly. Because we agreed that some lines are drawn by precision and not sentiment. Ironmark refers clients. That is different. The apartment in the Mira district is mine still, technically. I am there approximately twice a month. The penthouse on the 40th floor of a building that was designed to communicate permanence has a second closet that has been reconfigured. Corinna Vale sent a gift when the bond was publicly announced, a small print of a city at night, no note, which was exactly the kind of thing she would do, and which meant exactly the right amount, which is to say, not too much. Torres gave me a key card to the security system that has a different clearance level than the contractor card I'd been carrying. He said it was a standard administrative update. He did not make eye contact. These are the things that happened in order. Now I will tell you the thing that did not happen in order, because it happened all at once, at a particular moment, on a morning 5 months after a Tuesday conference room and an accidental bond, and a lobby, and an entity map, and a park at 6:40, with the dark still on the city. We were at the window, the good window, on 43, the one with the city and the iron to the east and the light that arrives in a particular way in the morning, warm through glass, the color of something kept. She was drinking coffee. I was reading. The bond between us was the settled-in version, wide and quiet, neither of us transmitting anything with force, just the ordinary background texture of 2 people who are each other's frequency now. She put her coffee down. She said my name. I looked up. She had a small box in her hand. She was on one knee before I processed that she'd moved, which was Sable's way of doing decisive things, deciding off-screen and presenting only the result. The box was dark velvet, not new, older, worn at the corner, The kind of thing that has been somewhere meaningful. My mother's. She wore it on her right hand. I'd like you to wear it on your left. I looked at the ring in the box. It was a simple band with a single stone, dark green, the color of pine at the edge of dark. This is not a business arrangement. I'm aware. I want you to have the full record. I love you. I am certain about you in the way I am certain about load-bearing structures, not because the math is perfect, but because I've tested every point of failure and the thing holds. It holds. She paused. The thing holds, Rhea. I was aware of my own breathing. Ask me, will you marry me? Yes, obviously yes. I paused, since about day 4. The pastries. The pastries. She put the ring on my finger. She stayed on the floor a moment after, her forehead against my hand, and I felt through the bond the thing that had been behind glass for a long time standing in full weather, unprotected and unheld and entirely itself, which is what love looks like when someone who learned to protect things finally stops. She stood up. I took her face in my hands. The bond knew before we did. The bond knew before I was willing to. You got there. You heard me get there. Every step, every draft. She kissed me in the morning light, with the city below us, and the pine and iron scent of her, the entire available atmosphere, and outside the window the day was beginning its ordinary business, indifferent to us, and we were entirely indifferent to it, which is the specific luxury of two people who have found the room they were meant to be in. The wedding was small because Sable's idea of small is 28 people in a room with good acoustics and flowers that cost more than my first car. We were bonded already, formally, but she wanted the ceremony. For the witnesses, she said, which I understood to mean for the record, because she is a person who believes in documentation. Torres stood in the second row. He did not cry. He also did not blink for approximately 45 seconds during the vows, which is Torres' equivalent of weeping. Mara cried openly and took notes simultaneously. The vows were ours, written separately and revealed only in the moment, which meant I heard hers through the bond before she said them, and she did not know that. And I stood across from her with her hands in mine and heard her voice saying the words that her mind had been building for 3 weeks, and the doubled experience, the private version and the spoken version at once, was the most I had ever felt of anything. She said, I spent 15 years building walls that I called structure. Then I met a woman who reads structure backward and finds the spaces where the map goes quiet. You found the spaces I'd left in myself without knowing I'd left them. I would like to spend however long we have filling them in together. I choose this. I choose you. Not the bond, you, I said. I've been looking for negative space my whole professional life. The thing that should be there, and isn't. I didn't know I was also looking for it in my life until I found it. It sounded like black pine in rain. It felt like the floor going solid. It was you. It has always been you, since a conference room and a document and a thought you didn't know you were sending. I choose you. With full information and complete awareness of the definitions section. I choose you. Corinna was there, in the back. She was the only person I didn't expect who came. She waited until after and found me at the edge of the room and said, You look like someone who won the argument. I wasn't arguing. No, that's how you won. She raised her glass. She's more herself with you than I ever saw her. That matters. She looked at Sable across the room, in a white coat that was severe and somehow exactly right, receiving congratulations from the board member who had once stood in a hallway and said remarkable work. That matters more than everything else. I know. Good. What came after was a year. The year has its own texture, morning runs and late evenings on 43, and the small accumulations of a life that is going well, which are not dramatic and are everything. What I will tell you is what happened to the people the story needed to address. Yuan Kasan's sentence was 8 years. He served 6. He did not return to the industry. The 3 men from the lobby, 2 in custody, 1 relocated, are outside this story's frame now. They made choices. The choices had consequences. The consequences found them. The board member who said remarkable work was later named chair of the audit committee, which he considers a distinction. He is correct. The Callaway acquisition closed cleanly in the spring. The merged entity operates under a new name. Maram Holdings does not appear in any current filing. The negative space, for once, is intended. Sable is different and the same. She is the architect of necessary ruin when the situation calls for it, which is less often than before, because the situation calls for it less often when the people around you know you have someone to come home to. She is something else in the morning, in the park with the dark still on the city, and the iron gate, and the route she showed me the first time I appeared at the entrance. She is someone I hear continuously, not because the bond imposes it, but because she has stopped guarding the signal. She still thinks about my mouth at meetings. She no longer pretends this is a professional inconvenience. I am still thorough. I still read backward. I still find the things that should be there and locate the spaces the map leaves silent. I do this for clients now, and also in a different register, for her, for the spaces she leaves in herself that she no longer needs to protect, that she offers instead, in the morning light, in the room we have become for each other. The ring is dark green on my left hand, the color of pine at the edge of dark. Vera Ashcroft wore it on her right hand and believed you could prevent grief by leaving first. She was wrong about the math. Her daughter knows this now. The bond told her. I confirmed it. She believes it, not because the biology installed the belief, but because she chose it, every morning, in the park, and at the window, and in the documentation of a life that is held and known and entirely, finally, seen. What I know about being invisible is that it has a texture. It is the texture of being looked at without being found. What I know about being seen is that it arrived all at once on a Tuesday morning in a conference room, not in a flourish, but in the accidental opening of a channel that ran between 2 nervous systems and said, without asking permission, you. I found you. The rest was the choice. Both times, every time. Her. The end.